Now, we've all heard of superpowers that are just terrible, such as being able to fly, but only 2 inches off the ground, or being able to read a person's mind, but every time you do so, you get chronic diarrhea. Now, these are silly powers that just aren't worth having, and that's the point, they're just jokes that people have come up with. But this list isn't about these kinds of superpowers, it's about superpowers that are frequently used and accepted in the world of comic books and superheroes, but when you actually think about them, are completely worthless in the real world. Now, this isn't dragging down superpowers. In fact, I'd love to have a superpower, literally any superpower. Hell, I'd even take the one that gives you chronic diarrhea when you read minds. No, the point of this video is just to talk about the flaws of superpowers if they existed in real life. It's just for fun and for no other reason. Really, it's just a bit of overthinking it. Though I imagine I'll still get a lot of hate in the comments, but anyway, let's get on with the video. Shapeshifting. A great perk of shapeshifting is being able to turn into someone, or something, bigger and stronger than you are. Which is fantastic for a fight, as you can beat anyone because you're bigger than them. The problem is that growing this fast isn't really possible in the real world, as all that extra mass, the bone, the muscle, tissue and flesh, has to come from somewhere. So if a normal person grew like this, they'd probably die from trying to grow so big so fast, as they'd use up literally all the nutrients in their body. Because it takes a lot of fuel and a lot of food to grow so fast. So without an enormous amount of nutrients on standby, a person would just collapse from exhaustion when they try to grow like this, and they'll desperately need to be put on an IV drip. Of course, if they did have enough nutrients in their body, then it is possible, though I imagine it would still be incredibly tiring. But that's not the only problem. You see, human bodies just aren't meant to grow this fast. I actually used to know a guy in school who grew over a foot in 1 month, which is just insane. We couldn't believe when we saw him after we came back to school from the break and he was over 6 feet tall. We were also surprised to see that he had his arm in a cast. And it turns out that he grew so fast that he actually broke his arm, along with a few ribs. Because growing that fast stopped the bones from being able to knit right, because people really shouldn't grow that fast. And that's just the accidents that can happen in the case of growth over a few weeks. But over a few seconds? Well, a lot of bones would break if you did that. So if you shapeshifted in real life, you'd probably have to do it slowly over the course of several weeks, at least, and better yet over the course of several months. Otherwise, it's going to be very painful and could result in a lot of injuries. And there is also the problem that once you get big, how exactly would you get small again? After all that extra bone, muscle and other tissue has to go somewhere. So if a person did shrink back down, their body would have to be extremely dense to compensate for this, because it'd all have to be compacted in. Now, there are a lot of universes where this extra mass can go to another dimension, and that's how a person gets bigger and smaller. They call in mass from somewhere else, and then they send it back when they're done with it. But in real life, that seems incredibly unlikely to work, and the mass has to go somewhere. So unless a person is going to literally throw up all that extra flesh, or have it leave their body in some other way, then it has to stay in their body. Meaning that if a person grew bigger, then they'd likely have to stay that size forever. They might be able to change into a giant gorilla and then change back to a human, but they'd probably be a giant human because they'd have all that extra mass. And this would be a severe limitation on the superpower, as you'd really have to think about when you choose to get big, as it would likely be permanent, so you couldn't just do it willy-nilly. And speaking of size changing, shrinking. A lot of time in science fiction, when a person shrinks an object, people then pick it up like it's a toy. But that is completely ridiculous. The laws of conservation of mass state that all the object's mass must still be present, meaning that although an object is smaller, it would still weigh the same, because all the mass is still there, and the atoms of the object haven't gone anywhere. Yes, the object is smaller, but that's just because the atoms have moved closer together. And though the object has shrunk, that just means that it would have become incredibly dense. So lifting a truck that's been shrunk is not possible, not unless you have super strength and can lift a truck anyway, because that small truck weighs exactly the same of when it was bigger. It doesn't matter what the size is, it still weighs the same. And the same is true of human shrinking. For example, Ant-Man shrinks down and goes inside Iron Man's armour in the Civil War film. And Iron Man doesn't even notice. Not until he starts destroying his suit anyway. But in reality, the weight of a full-grown man on Tony Stark's armour would definitely be noticed, as he would still weigh the same even if he shrunk down. He's exactly the same person, he's just smaller, so he's going to weigh exactly the same. Though because of this, they would have the same level of muscle strength, which means they could still lift the same things they could lift when they were big. And they'd also be able to jump really high, or at least really high for when they're shrunk. To us it would only be a couple of feet, but when you're shrunk really little, a couple of feet would seem like a lot more to jump. And that's one of the few good points of this. If you did come across an ant or something, it wouldn't really matter because you'd be considerably stronger than him. However, there are other downsides, because unfortunately if you shrink small enough, then you wouldn't be able to breathe at this size. You see, our lungs are designed to breathe at the normal size, and they're designed to absorb oxygen molecules at the size we are. And if you shrunk down, then your body wouldn't be able to absorb these oxygen molecules, because they'd be too big for our lung structure. Now, this obviously depends on how small you are. I mean, if you just shrink down to be, say, a foot tall, you'd be fine. But if you kept shrinking even smaller, then you'd be in some serious trouble, because you wouldn't be able to breathe at all. Now, in the case of a lot of people who shrink, such as Ant-Man or the Wasp, when they shrink down, they do have a private supply of oxygen inside their suit, so they're fine. And a lot of other superheroes, such as Bumblebee, do carry their own oxygen with them for when they shrink. But those who shrink down and don't have oxygen, well, they would die from asphyxiation, and it would not be pretty.
Sonic Scream. A sonic scream is basically a superpowered scream that is so powerful it can actually destroy objects. Now, the most famous user of this scream is most likely Black Canary, who uses the force of the scream to cause damage to people and property around her, and to deafen and shock her enemies. Now, the problem with this scream is that it is a scream, and if you used it to deafen enemies, it would also deafen you, and also your teammates and everyone else in the area. It's a scream after all, and so everyone around you would be able to hear it. You can't pick and choose the people who listen to it, so you couldn't really use it to deafen people without hurting yourself and your friends. And if you used it to destroy property, then it would still deafen you and everyone around you. And in fact, it would probably cause you and everyone around you to go deaf permanently. And the second problem with this is that a scream can't be directed. Sound spreads outwards and vibrates through objects, which is why if a person talks loudly, you can still hear them even if you're standing behind them, or if they're standing on the other side of a closed door. So any scream that can knock over a building will destroy everything around it as well. Again, you can't pick and choose what the scream will destroy, it will just destroy everything. So whereas Black Canary has used her sonic scream to destroy buildings, in reality any allies in the area would have had their bones shattered and their bodies completely destroyed. And most likely any person who screams this loud would themselves explode from the sonic force, unless they have some kind of invulnerability, healing power, or sonic immunity. For example, Black Bolt also has a superpowered scream. In fact, he probably has the most superpowered scream in all of fiction. It's so powerful that he could actually shatter the moon with a yell, which is why he never ever uses his voice, because it's just too powerful. But when he does, on rare occasions, use it, and he uses it as a whisper, which still has crazy destructive power, he's only able to do this because he's pretty much invulnerable himself. He's also super tough on top of having the ability. Whereas a lot of other people who have the power to scream aren't actually invulnerable, they're just basically normal humans who can scream. So this is a power that seems great, but if you used it, then you deafen everyone around you, including yourself and allies, and any destruction would happen indiscriminately, meaning every object, every person, everything around you would be affected, would be destroyed and damaged. So you wouldn't really be able to use this power for much, meaning it's pretty much useless in the real world.
Empath. The holy grail of superpowers. The very best superpower there is of course to be an empath. Being able to absorb and copy another person's superpowers is nothing short of the best superpower there is, because you would be able to get anyone's powers, healing powers, the power to fly, super strength, telekinesis, and so on. You can have literally all the superpowers, not just one. And characters such as Peter Petrelli from Heroes and Rogue from X-Men can achieve literal godlike levels of power. Peter is immortal, can shoot lightning, has telekinesis, can shoot fire from his hands, teleport anywhere in the world, time travel, read and control minds, and even cause nuclear explosions. He is literally a god. Of course, in the later seasons of Heroes he did lose these powers, but that's besides the point. And this is undoubtedly the greatest superpower there is, at least in the world of comics and superheroes. But in the real world, this power is 100% worthless, as this is an ability that depends completely on other people having powers. But if you live in the real world where no one else has abilities, there's nothing for you to absorb and copy. In fact, for all we know, every single person on this planet, including me, you, and the millions of others, could have this superpower, and none of us would know it, because there are no other powers for us to copy. So for all of us here in the real world, this power is utterly worthless. Talking to animals. Now, I really hate saying this power sucks, because I love animals and I would love to be able to talk to them. But really, it just wouldn't work. Not unless there is some kind of telepathy or psychic control involved. There's actually an old saying, even if a lion could speak English, you wouldn't understand it. And this is because even if we could talk the same language as animals, they wouldn't be able to understand us, because animals have no way of relating to us. Just think about it. How would you explain tax law to a lion? Or the complexities of democracy and voting and how we have a two-party system and this is the best there is, to a squirrel? I mean, all they know about is gathering and collecting nuts. The idea of voting in an election for a leader to appoint laws and other people to judicial positions so that they can govern you, well, it would go completely over their head. Hell, let's be honest, it goes completely over a lot of humans' heads. And the reason they wouldn't understand this is because animals have no form of reference for this. Animals just couldn't understand our world, because one, they aren't smart enough, and even if they were, they live in a completely different universe. I mean, some animals can't even see colour. Then how on earth would you explain colour to someone who can't see it? And though having a conversation with animals works great for a Disney princess, in reality they couldn't understand you or even be able to talk back, because their mouths and vocal cords don't work like ours, and a lot of them couldn't actually make words even if they knew how. Now, if you could control them, then that would be a different story, as that could be extremely useful in real life. Though you'd have to constantly be in control of them. Of course, you couldn't just tell them to go do something and leave them to it. Say you said, take this to this person, or look out for this person, guard this. As soon as you stop being in control of their minds, they just forget and return to being an animal. Animals have very simple brains after all, and they run on instinct. A lot of animals can't even make memories or think about the future. They can't think, what's going to happen in a minute? Should I keep some food stored away? A lot of animals can only think in the here and now, because they run just on instinct. So if you took over control of their mind, you'd have to literally constantly be taking control of it, because as soon as you stopped having any control or set them on a task, they just forget about it. So although you might be able to control them, you'd probably only be able to control them one-on-one. Take Squirrel Girl for example, who controls thousands of squirrels at once. She probably wouldn't be able to do that because it would be too taxing on her mind. She'd only be able to do one or two at a time. And she wouldn't just be able to talk to them and ask them for help because, one, they wouldn't be able to understand her, and two, they just wouldn't care. They're squirrels after all. So actually being able to talk to animals, although it sounds fantastic, would actually be pointless, and it wouldn't help you, and it wouldn't help anyone else. Unless of course it turns out that it's all like Rick and Morty, and squirrels actually control the world.
The situation in Argentina has proven less convenient than predicted.
Well, we'll have to re-destabilize their economy, refocus labor class outrage from upper to middle, foster a coup, and install a compliant regime.
And those are 5 superpowers that just wouldn't work in real life. Or at least as not as well as they do in films and comics. Are there any other flaws with these powers that you think I've missed? And are there any other superpowers that you'd like analysed in a future video? Be sure to let us know in the comments. And should I say a quick thank you to those who made this video possible by donating to the Needle Mouse Productions page on Patreon. And as always, thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe, share, like, and comment.